Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast brings you stories and wisdom about life in law enforcement, giving support and encouragement to those who wear the badge. Today, I'm talking to Sheriff Don Ash. Don is retiring after getting elected 3 times as Sheriff of Wyandotte County, Kansas, and that came after a 35-year career in the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. Don is a well-respected leader and a man of faith with nearly 50 years of law enforcement experience. I asked him if he was willing to share about the process of running for the elected office of sheriff, and he readily agreed. If you have aspirations to be a leader of an organization, perhaps in the place you're at now or a different agency, take a moment and soak up this wisdom. Moving from a merit or seniority-based system to a campaign for a public office is a big leap, and Don has a lot of wisdom about how to approach this transition. He also offers insight on how to navigate moving into a new agency, in this case, from a police department to the top job at a sheriff's office. Here's Don Ash. Welcome, Don. I'm glad that you're here today.
Well, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're glad to be able to sit down and talk about your history. You have a very interesting background. You had a 35-year career in the police department and then ran for county sheriff. And so tell me a little bit of what that was like, moving from a position where you had advanced through the ranks based on, primarily on merit and your ability to, pass an interview and that kind of thing, to running for an elected office. What is that even like? I mean, what are the differences there?
Yeah, it's quite a contrast. So the last time I applied for a job and got hired at the police department was back in 1971, and the last time I had an interview to get the job. Now, of course, we had some promotion processes and there were interviews involved in those and so forth. But switching over to becoming the sheriff, I tell people I never worked so hard to get a job in all of my life, including any of the promotions I had at the police department. It just is totally different. Being elected is pretty unique around the world. It's certainly something that we're used to here in the United States, but a lot of people just really don't understand what all goes into it. And so you have to vet out. You hear candidates talk about, well, I have an exploratory committee. Well, I was the exploratory committee, but I asked questions of a number of people, and I counseled with some mentors and people that I consider, and I value their opinion greatly.
Did you pursue it mostly yourself, or did you have people approach you, or was it a combination?
Well, actually, I had 2 different groups approach me.
Okay.
There was a group of people internal to the sheriff's office that first approached me and spoke with me about it. And then I had a group of citizens come and speak with me about it. After the second occasion of people coming and talking to me, that's when I started to consider it and start to talk to some people. I talked obviously with, my wife and family members and some other people that I knew that had helped get some people elected, even, to Congress and so forth. And I tried to go into it with my eyes wide open.
Right.
And I think I did, but it's still, a lot of work, because after all of that comes then you have to figure out how you're going to raise money if you're not independently wealthy, and I'm not. You can spend as much as your own money as you want, but rarely is that sufficient. So
Sure.
I had some folks that helped with that aspect of it that were really good at that kind of thing, and it truly does become a big team effort.
Yeah.
To get to the point where you're going to be in contention for anything.
Let's circle back to talking to your family. This is 2009. You've been retired from the police department for a year or two. So how do you approach them about this? Was your family already cognizant of like, oh yeah, well, Don may want to run for sheriff someday, or was this kind of out of the blue for them?
It was out of the blue for me and everybody. I thought when I left the police department, right. I thought when I left the police department, I'd probably end up being maybe a chief in a smaller department somewhere, which is what I had in my head, because I never had done anything on the sheriff's side of, the law enforcement world. And so I had no real frame of reference. I had a few good friends over the years with the sheriff's office, and so I talked, I eventually did end up talking to them too, but it was totally out of the blue. I didn't see this as a track for me.
Right.
I had pursued the chief's job, and to bring, faith into it a little bit, I spent quite a bit of time, praying about that and counseling about it, and I felt very confident that the Lord was saying, okay, yes, I have something for you to do now that you're done, doing this part of it. And then I was not appointed to the chief, so that's when I decided to take my pension. And my pension date's January 1, 2007. The first group came to me probably 7-8 months later. So it was 2007 when the first group came. And then the second group came a few months later. It actually still was in 2007. The other thing I did in 2007 is I ran for the Board of Trustees at Kansas City, Kansas Community College. And I was successful, being elected there.
So that was actually your first election experience?
Correct.
Okay.
And I think that factored in with each of these two groups that came to me. They said, well, he has the skills, knowledge, and abilities. He had a great run at the police department, and he's now demonstrated he can get elected. Yeah,
people are actually going to check that box, at least in one scenario. Maybe it'll translate over here. So, yeah.
So exactly. So that was a big piece of it. That was a big factor of it. And then the only thing I had to vet out, was that a conflict of interest in some way? Can a person even hold two elected offices in one county? And so as it turns out, there is no conflict of interest between being a trustee at the college and being in the sheriff. And so I was cleared to pursue that. Right. So that was part of the, checking everything out process.
Right. What was maybe the biggest stress for you and your family going through that first election cycle?
Well, the biggest stress for me, at least personally, was the incumbent sheriff was who I was running against, who was a friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine.
Yeah.
We had played a lot of softball together and a couple of other things of interest over the course of our careers. And so that was very difficult for me because I definitely was not interested in, any sort of thing that you see common in politics, like, people attacking other people and, trying to drag this, that, and the other thing. And I didn't do that. And in fact, I told everybody that was working with me, I said, we're not doing that. Yeah. I won't abide that. So if you're going to be like that, it's probably best, you don't work with us in this thing. And so that was very difficult and very tough for me because I knew I was going to put a friend out of a job, if you will.
Yeah.
And I wasn't exactly sure where he was in terms of his career and being ready and able to, retire. So
sure.
That was pretty tough. And then the other thing is, your family goes through the election too, because they hear all of the stuff that's out there. And there was stuff, social media and one thing or another. Yeah. And it was very difficult to keep my family members, calm down. I'm like, I really didn't look at any of that stuff, but they all wanted to show me.
They were probably pretty defensive for you.
Look what so-and-so said, or what is she talking about and all that. I'm like, hey, just quit reading that stuff. Just forget about it. I don't pay any attention to it. You know what the truth is. You know what you know, and so don't worry about it. But your family members, they don't want to see people talk about you like that.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear people talk about you like that.
Yeah.
And so, but when you put yourself out there, you open yourself up. You're really, really vulnerable.
Yeah. But law enforcement families experience some of that just as soon as you put on a uniform. I mean, there is some criticism directed at you and your coworkers right from the get-go. So, I mean, there is a little bit of experience with that, wouldn't you say?
Well, there is, and certainly is more so now than really what it used to be. But I was very fortunate in my career to be able to do some things that not everybody gets a chance to do in their career. And so I had a public persona, if you will, going into it. I think that's another thing that worked very much in my favor all of the years that I did media relations and, would be on the TV or the radio or quoted in a newspaper. People got an opportunity to see who I am, who I was, and how I handled, various things. I did the DARE program and worked throughout the school systems, all of the school systems, in Kansas City, Kansas. The community policing experience, getting around and working with and interacting with all of the neighborhood groups and different people, helping them work on solving problems, that they were having in their neighborhood and things. I met a lot of great people, made a lot of good friends and associates, and all of those things really worked in my favor. And you get some criticism even for some of those things, but it would, it wouldn't last long and it would blow away with the wind,
Well, I can tell you, sitting over here on the sidelines, that over the last 12 years, you've run 3 times, and you're near the end of your 3rd term as we record this, and people have said the best things about you as sheriff, and you seem to be very highly respected, and many, many people have positive things to say about you. But you're not going to run again. You're gonna retire, and some other people are now running for this office. If someone came to you and asked you, "Hey, I'd like to run for sheriff," what's the main thing they should take stock of? What count? You need to count the cost. So what should they consider before they put their hat in the ring?
Well, that's a really good question. I think there are a number of things. I think, first of all, you have to have a proper perspective of who you are. I think you have to be very comfortable, if you will, with who you are, and I think you have to know what you think and what you believe and why, because it's going to get challenged. And it's going to be an internal challenge sometimes. Scripture says a man ought not to think more highly of himself than he should. And when you have people constantly telling you good things like you just said, it's a daily battle. I mean, it's a daily struggle. Sure. You're appreciative, and all that, but you got to be careful that what's not getting inflated is your ego, and in the process you lose your reputation.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be very, very comfortable with who you are, and you have to be able to accept, well, this is an election. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. Yeah. And so you have to be willing to accept that it's going to be a lot of work, and you're going to go after it. You're going to invest your time, talent, treasure, and tears in it. And, it may work out and it may not. So I think you have to be prepared for that. and not let it, knock you down if somebody would not be successful at doing it.
Sure.
And then I think, once again, you have to have a real open and honest conversation with your family and your friends and your loved ones, because, once again, they go through it with you.
Yeah.
And so you have to be sure that they're prepared for that. And they work right alongside you. They walk the routes and hand out, handbills if you're in a parade or doing something there, working the table to either collect money or record who's coming into various events, because there's a lot of record keeping and reports that have to be completed for the election office and the Secretary of State's office. You have to keep detailed records, and they're all open records, so they have to be done correctly and properly, and it takes a real team, to do it.
So part of the transition that you had in your story was not only from being promoted through the police department to running for office, but you're also moving from one agency to another. And that's a tricky transition for some people. You're really good where you're at, but you see an opportunity somewhere else, and that's a difficult thing. So moving from the police department to the sheriff's office, what was that transition like, and what were the points of comparison? How were they different? What was that like for you?
Well, yeah, it was very new to me, because, once again, I did not have any experience really on the sheriff's side of it, although I did have a couple of good friends, and I've picked up a little bit here and there along the way. But I could count the number of people working at the sheriff's office that I personally knew on probably one hand, or not even all of the second hand at the most. And so I didn't know very many, although a few that I did know were very knowledgeable, and they helped me as we were going through the campaign. They were helping to edify me and inform me, about different things.
Get you up to speed.
And so, the other thing I would say is, when you're coming in, you have to listen. You have to listen. You have to meet with people. You have to get to know people. A lot of people at the police department I worked with either when they were applying or afterwards, as I would work with them teaching various classes in their recruit academy. Mm-hmm. And so I would get to know them, sometimes a lot of them before they were ever married or had their families. And then I was there a lot of those years when they did get married, went to some of their weddings, when their children were born. Yeah. Had some of their children in DARE class when I was, doing DARE class. And so it just, and as the police department, the public safety services, it's very familial anyway. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of truly is like a band of brothers and sisters. You're having a shared experience that not very many people, have, especially when the really tough and difficult things come along. And so when you go to a new agency, you don't have any of that. Mm-hmm. And so you have to get to know people. Sheriff's office is unique in that it is elected, and it has a lot of different statutory authorities, but it has all of the same statutory authorities that a local or a municipal police department would have. Right. So sheriff's deputies can do virtually everything that the city police officers do, but the city police don't run a jail. Right. And the city police don't serve the courts or serve court orders or anything like that. That falls under the purview of the sheriff's office. So the missions are similar and the same, and police officers have jurisdiction in their jurisdiction, so within the city limits of Kansas City, Kansas, or Bonner Springs or Edwardsville, they have limited law enforcement authority outside of those jurisdictions, whereas the sheriff's deputies have that full jurisdiction everywhere in the county.
Did you find that learning curve difficult, or were you able, with people's help around you, were able to master that pretty quickly?
It really wasn't too difficult because, once again, even at the years at the police department, there was a time when the police department had a city jail. And as a cadet, I actually worked in the jail. So I had been in I had been in a jail. I had been around pretrial detainees, you know, folks that were in custody and so on and so forth. And it was very, very different because all of them literally were there just very temporarily, and then they were getting out. Whereas at the current jail, at the county jail, they're all getting out and going somewhere. It's really the deputies that have a life sentence in the county jail, right? But they're eventually getting out and going somewhere, but they end up being there longer than we kept them at the city. So I had a little reference there. I worked with, I had the opportunity to share office space with Officer Ron Hoyler, who did tag enforcement for the police department.
Okay.
And there was a task force that included deputies from the Wyandotte County Sheriff's Office as well. In fact, the former sheriff was in tag enforcement at the sheriff's office before he became undersheriff and then ultimately sheriff there. So I picked up, you know, this and that about the courts and court service and different things like that. But I had to learn a lot more when I got in there. But my first task was really to come in there and learn the agency.
Yeah.
Learn the people first, figure out who's my team.
Yeah.
You know, what type. It's not any different than a new coach coming into a team, you know.
Okay.
Well, you might know a little bit about some of the players, you know, but now they're your players. And so, and to figure out, I said, look, we need to do a complete analysis and evaluation of everything that we're doing here. I need to hear from you. What are we not doing that, in your judgment, we should be doing, or we need to be doing, or we have a statutory responsibility to do for sure? What are we doing that you don't think we need to be doing?
Yeah.
You know, and then we will come together and work on how to figure that out.
Now, that's something I've always wondered. When someone's running for office for the first time, inevitably you're going to get asked to make what amounts to campaign promises. But if you're going into, you know, you're crossing into a different agency, a different department, a different, you know, in this case, the sheriff's office, you don't know for sure what should be done. And when you get boots on the ground, when you're actually there, you may get told differently than what you thought while you were campaigning. Did you have much of a difference, or did you feel like you went in pretty well informed?
Well, you're exactly right in terms of, you know, the whole campaign promises thing and all of that type of thing, which I didn't make any.
That'll solve that problem.
I'll take that back. I made one. I said, I promise you that I will come in and we will analyze and assess and evaluate everything, anything you want to, and everything that we need to. And then we'll figure out what needs to happen from there, but we'll do it collaboratively and we'll do it collectively. It was interesting. There were a lot of people when I got there that had their stuff all boxed up. They expected that I would come in there
and fire
them and then bring all of my buddies from the police department in there, or other people, or whatever the case may be, which, as I found out going through this over the years, is not uncommon in a lot of places.
Oh, wow.
And there actually is, you know, the statute that gives the sheriff really the authority to do that. But we're in just a little bit different situation here because of the dynamic of the unified government. So the sheriff gets elected and the undersheriff by statute is 100% a pick and a selection of the sheriff.
Okay.
Everybody else under the undersheriff are also employees of the unified government. So we've got to have this dance.
Right.
The sheriff and the unified government officials have to have this dance that we do to make all of those things work.
Yeah,
and
here in Wyandotte County, Kansas, we're one of the few places in the country where the county government and the city government are one and the same.
Are consolidated.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so it gets messy sometimes, but it's been there's not a lot of mess, but it gets messy sometimes because as sheriff, I swear an oath, to support and defend the Constitution and the statutes of the state and the ordinances and resolutions of the unified government.
Yeah.
Some of which I maybe don't necessarily agree with, like, for example, the residency requirement or whatever. But I did take an oath to follow those things. So, so there's this delicate dance that gets done. The statute gives the sheriff complete authority to run the sheriff's office, and instructs the local county government that they're responsible to fund the operation of the sheriff at a reasonable level.
Yeah. Okay. Now,
reasonable means different things to different people, Jared.
Yes,
you never run into that in the pastorate, do you?
No, heavens, no.
So there, it's a delicate dance. It's a little dicey. So what I promised them was I would take a look at everything, and what it needed fixed, we'd figure out how to fix it or whatever. We'd deal with these various issues. But I didn't promise anybody any jobs. I didn't promise anybody any promotions. I didn't promise anybody any of those kinds of things.
That's wise not to back yourself or paint yourself into a corner that way.
I told them, that the unions particularly were vetting FOP 40, FOP 4, KU, FOP, the state FOP. They wanted to get behind and back one candidate. And so we had this large meeting and this vetting, and I told them, if that doesn't work for you, then don't endorse me, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you something that I don't even know I can deliver. That's just not the way to be.
Do you have any advice? I think it's probably not uncommon, especially in larger cities, for someone wanting to run for sheriff to be coming out of law enforcement and maybe not have exactly the same political alignment as the city or county government. That probably happens from time to time. Do you have any advice on how to navigate that, or any words of wisdom for, you're working for politicians that are not going to fund law enforcement the way they maybe should, or at least the way you might think that they should, coming from a law enforcement perspective. So how do you navigate when you're probably not exactly of the same stripe as the people that you're having to answer to?
Yeah, I think most public service people, commissioners, legislators, council people, whatever, really at the core of what most of them are wanting to do is they really are wanting to serve. They really are wanting to be helpful. Yeah. And then they run into these, these personal conflicts or these roadblocks, these different things. But really the key in all of it is, it's not much different than it is in the church. It's in building the relationships. It's in having the relationships and building the relationships. In my case, a lot of the people that were, and I went through 3 different forms of government in Kansas City, Kansas, while I was over my career as a police officer. So I had worked with a lot of them already. I'd worked with a lot of the appointed staff, whether it was someone in the county administrator's office or someone in the finance office or the public relations, media relations office, the mayor's office, various things. When we're doing DARE and community policing and those kind of things, our mayors and our county administrators had to be on board and invested in that. And so a lot of them had the opportunity to know me, to have a relationship with me.
To build personal rapport.
Figure out who I was. And then the other thing that's incredibly important is, you must be open. You must be transparent. You must be, if you're going to be collaborative, people can't think you have some ulterior motive or some personal agenda or some kind of a thing like that. That you're really trying to build some kind of an empire out of this, that, or the other thing. And I think people knew that, that's not really what I was about. I really just wanted to serve the community, work with the community, I have a family here in the community. I raised a family here in the community. I want the community to be a safe place.
Right.
I want it to be a good place for people to come, to live, to raise their family, to work, to recreate, play. So I'm all in about that. I'm not interested in records or awards or any of those kinds of things. And I have gotten a number of them, and they're fine, and they're all that. But that's, so I think that's why I say you really have to know who you are if you're going to do this and why you're doing it. If it's all about you and your ego, well, don't do it, please. For the rest of us, don't do it. But if you do really want to serve, you want to be helpful, you think you have something you can give and offer, then by all means, we need you. We need those people to come up and get engaged in it, and understand it's going to be messy and at times confrontational, one thing or another. You have to be able to live with that. You have to be able to deal with it.
Sure. Now, I know you're also a man of faith. You're a leader in your church. You teach Sunday school. That's one of the first things someone told me about you, was that you taught Sunday school. Mm-hmm. And so how does being a person who's a believer intersect with being a law enforcement officer over the course of your career?
Well, I'll tell you, Jared, I got into this as a police cadet because I was looking for a way to get a college degree and somebody else to pay for it. And so the cadet program at the time, you came on, it was kind of like an apprenticeship program you had to be a minimum 17 and a half years old and graduated from high school, but less than 21 years old because state law requires you to be 21 to be a law enforcement officer. So that's where I was. Graduated from high school, working at Hallmark Cards in a warehouse in Fairfax, After about 30 days of that, I figured out, now this is really not what I want to do, for the rest of my life. And then, I learned about the cadet program. And so you worked 40 hours a week or close to it. And you went to, at the time, it was Kansas City, Kansas Junior College down at 9th and State Avenue. And they paid for it. It was a grant-funded program. And so that's kind of what I got into it for. If you associate's degrees 2 years, you had to commit to 2 years in the field for every 2 years they paid for your college, right? Okay. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm in it for 4 years, right? I got to be willing to do the 4 years. Well, first of all, you learn that you only get to go to school part-time. So that 2-year degree takes,
Right. It took longer and longer and longer.
In my case, it was like 9 or something like that, whatever it was.
It didn't work out to about 35 years, did it? Okay.
All right. So anyway, then after that, it just got kind of into my blood and everything. But at the time, also a fairly new Christian, fairly young, trying to learn that also and grow and develop. I had some good mentors in various churches where I was, and so that was moving along. But then those things come into conflict at times, and then once again, as a newer Christian, you're trying to figure that out too, because I saw things and heard things and had to deal with things that were unlike anything in my growing up years experience. Yeah. And so it was really eye-opening. But somewhere along the line, it gets into your blood, if you will, so to speak. But in looking back on it now, I see the providence of God along the way in a lot of it. there. And I think very much the people that get into this and they do it, and they do it well, I think they consider it to be a calling, something that they're very clearly called into. And I came to that epiphany somewhere along the way there, and then I accepted that. And then, of course, my number one mentor was God. My study of the Scriptures and prayer and meditation and counseling with good Christian men of the faith and so forth, and just sort of grew up into that. I believe very firmly in what Romans chapter 13 says, particularly at the early part of it, about officers being ministers of God. It was kind of a punchline in Blues Brothers. We're on a mission from God, but in Romans 13, it's not. It very clearly sets out there that
people
it is.
Wrongly say that you can't legislate morality, but really all laws are exactly that. They are legislating morality. And
Absolutely.
Law enforcement is upholding, say, look, we have some basic rules about having a civil society, and we're going to hold you to that. And
That's right.
And so it's absolutely connected to morality, and an officer's personal integrity really matters.
Yeah.
That's an important aspect of functioning in their job.
Yeah, so it's been very much intertwined, over the years, and there, have been a number of occasions where that's served me well when I struggled with, I learned a long time ago to quit asking why things happen, because there sometimes just isn't any real good answer for that.
Yeah.
I mean, there really isn't.
Yeah.
And so I rather choose to say, okay, what? What, Lord, are you trying to reveal to me? What are you trying to reveal to us about yourself, or about how we are to dwell in the land here, or what we are to do? What are you trying to teach me or show me or reveal, to me? And that's a whole lot easier to sort through and to accept, because sometimes there's just no good answer for the why question.
No. God has, in His mysterious purposes, reasons why things happen, and we live in a broken world. And I know when I'm called out as a chaplain, it's almost always because someone's died, and
Sure.
and that's I don't have an explanation, because people ask me, well, why did my relative die tragically all of a sudden? And I don't have a reason. I don't have an answer specifically, but I know that God has called us to serve, and law enforcement, chaplains, other helpers are there to come help and to serve, and that's purpose in our life, and that can be a really beautiful thing.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, during the years that I was doing the media relations, as you know, usually it's the media relations person that's going with the chaplain, and you're doing those very difficult, death notifications and so forth. I've actually had a couple of people over the years that, I've run into, and they said, I don't know if you remember me or not, but you came to my house when my son was killed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I didn't, know and remember that,
of course,
because we were doing 60 and 70 of them a year back in those years, and on top of, 18 or 20 traffic fatalities a year.
Sure.
And we were doing a lot of them. I didn't do every one of those, but we sure did a whole lot of them. And I did that job for 6 years. So, there were a lot of occasions, but there were also a lot of occasions to be in a car with a chaplain, going to and coming from and being there in the ministry moment, and observing and listening and seeing and growing. And I developed some great relationships with the police chaplains over the years. I consider, some of them some of my closest and best friends. And, at times when I had significant personal challenges in my life, those were some of the guys that I, would talk to, and or it would work out that they would pop into my office, for this, that, or the other thing. And I just don't think that was accident. I look back on it and I see it all within the providence of God over my life.
That's awesome.
And so it was very much a source of strength and personal development.
Don, thank you so much for your service. Thank you for coming and talking to me today. And thank you for sharing your wisdom about all of these different things. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. I can talk all day about it if somebody will ask the right questions. It was fun. Thanks.
What a pleasure to talk to Don. Please understand that he is so well spoken, not because he's a slick politician, but because he's so transparently honest. After almost 5 decades in law enforcement, I see no trace of cynicism or despair in Sheriff Ash. He's still positive, energetic, and full of faith. Stereotypically, politics attracts the vain, narcissistic, and corrupt people in society who seek elected office as a way to wield power and profit personally. But if our nation is going to have a future, we need honest, good people in elected office, like Sheriff Ash. Now, we know the old saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you think that top leadership positions would be unhealthy for you or your family, then by all means, stay where you are, bloom where you're planted, find your niche, and serve well, and then retire. But if you think you can maintain your integrity, health, and good attitude at the highest levels of public service, then please, we need you to run. We need you to serve. After speaking to the sheriff, it made sense to me to point you back to a previous episode in which we spoke to Major Dewey Bond about his career in the sheriff's office.
The jail we had was an old linear-style jail, and it was built in 1929.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And besides that, it was overcrowded and understaffed and in the middle of being sued by the ACLU.
Right.
So I really walked into a hornet's nest on that thing.
Now, I never saw that jail, but by linear, I assume you mean that like all the cells are in like one long row.
Yes.
Right.
And the officer walks down the aisle looking in the cells.
Right. Right.
It's a reactive type of facility, so you don't deal with the situation till it's already happened.
Yeah.
It's not a very good thing for inmates.
Well, in that kind of building, you can't see into their cell until you get down to their cell.
Right.
Right.
So it's pretty much predator controlled.
That was Major Dewey Bond from episode 001. That's right, our very first episode. Check it out on the Hey Chaplain podcast. If you like what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
One of his reasoning was that if 2 officers got into a shootout and one of them run out of ammunition, the other officer could throw him one of his magazines and he could keep on shooting.
Now wait, a Glock 17 has how many rounds in the magazine?
They usually have 15 to 17, depending on the magazines.
Okay, and you carry 2 or 3 magazines, presumably.
Most of them did carry at least 2 and sometimes 3.
Okay, so your partner shot 50 shots, and the problem's not solved yet. Now he wants to take one of your magazines. Are you giving it to him?
No, because he's already proved to me that he can't hit what he's shooting. I'll guard him while he leaves, but he's not getting my bullets.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.